Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Generosity is power because you can enslave people by being generous to them. You can make them dependent on you, and this is power. Or it can be power. And there's a moral way to do it and an evil way to do it. Welfare is the evil way of doing it. Men creating a freemium system that takes care of XXers that are too ugly to find a husband or too old to find a husband is the moral way of doing it. That is, if men create a freemium charity, all men do, and do it outside the bounds of government and all that, and just voluntarily choose to take care of women, especially, ugly women or other women who are more likely to take government side against men. If men do that, then women become dependent on men, not on government, right? Welfare is dysgenic. A freemium system created by men would not be dysgenic. Welfare is non-consensual. Men don't want to have their taxes go to welfare for single mothers. Who would, right? And yet the government forces us to pay taxes at the barrel of a gun and then gives that money to single mothers against our will. But a freemium system would be consensual, would be voluntary, both in terms of the men only contributing to it if they wanted to, and in terms of the XXers not having to be on the freemium system if they did not want to be. The consensual way of doing things is almost always wiser, happier, more productive, sets a better example, thus causing more people to be moral, and the consensual way of doing things is always more free. Men are naturally generous. Now, XXers can be generous as well, but mainly to their kids and their husband and their relatives and stuff. But she's only generous to her husband if she loves him. But I think men are naturally more generous than XXers are. XXers cannot be generous in the way that men are, and so men can use this natural tendency to be generous in a calculating but benevolent way, and in a long-term way, and in a way that takes advantage of the weaknesses of XXers by giving them a freemium system to live off of, for the purposes of men enslaving XXers, to get XXers out of the workforce and to get XXers back on our side. Getting XXers out of the workforce would raise male wages so much that it would pay for the freemium system, and maybe even more than that, right? In other words, it would not cost men anything to pay for the freemium system because all men would be getting paid way more once XXers are out of the workforce due to just being able to live on the freemium system instead. Men would only have to pay the initial cost of the freemium system until it caught on and tons of XXers were choosing to be on it, and thus were not working, and thus men were making more money at their own jobs. And getting XXers back on our side by making them dependent on our freemium system that we created for them would make it so that we could once again tell them how to vote, and then once XXers were once again voting the way that men were telling them to, or educating them to, then men could perhaps take back the country through voting, theoretically. I don't really believe in voting, so I don't know, but, and it's been totally subverted, because it's, they're voting, they're electronic voting machines. Only an idiot would trust an electronic voting machine. But at the very least, those XXers could provide very potent moral Teflon for men in men's war against the evil elites. Those XXers would be protecting the men who provide for them, and would be making anyone who speaks out against those men look bad in the public eye, because of everybody giving women sympathy and listening to women, right? Those XXers would make men's opposition look like monsters if women were back on men's side, right? Then the tyranny of tears would be working on men's behalf instead of against men. Men need to cut government out of the game of supporting XXers because whoever supports XXers has the power because XXers are on that person's side. And thus whoever is taking care of XXers is having gynocentrism work for his benefit. Thus, to get gynocentrism working in men's favor, men need to form a freemium system to take care of XXers for free. Maybe not all XXers, but at least the ugly and poor ones. XXers are not going to rise to ascendancy and help each other and promote each other and edge men out of the workforce so that more XXers are working and making good money than men are. I'm not saying they'll necessarily get out of the workforce if we don't form a freemium system, but they will never become 70 or 80% of the workforce and 70 or 80% of men are out of work or something, or even just 50%. That's probably never going to happen, right? Because what's going to happen is that the more XXers make good money, the fewer men make good money. And the fewer men who make good money, the fewer marriageable men there are out there. And the fewer marriageable men there are, the more XXers want to viciously compete with each other over the top men. Let's say the top 10 to 30% of men. And then XXers will no longer be supporting each other, but will be competing viciously and ruthlessly against each other because of the shortage of marriageable men. So then they're not going to be, helping each other in the workforce and stuff. They'll be backstabbing each other all the time, right? So XXers are never going to totally take over in the workforce. They'll instead rely on government, and so it's up to us men to beat government to the punch and start taking care of XXers ourselves by forming a freemium system for a large percentage of women so as to get them out of the workforce and get them back on our side, turned against government once again like they were just a few decades ago. Let's say, 40 to 70 years ago, there were way more XXers who were anti-government because there were way more XXers who were hardcore Christians. I mean, even the so-called Christian girls of today, not even girls, like even the women in their 30s and 40s and 50s today even they have already been massively corrupted and are no longer anti-government. This is a problem. I mean, Christian women definitely used to be anti-government. At least not all of them, obviously, because women are always going to be more pro-government than men are. But there were there was a way greater percentage of women who are anti-government than there is now, or even than there was 20 years ago. Like 100 years ago or 70 years ago, there was way more women who are anti-government, strongly anti-government, than there are today, or even than there were back in the 90s. I mean, things have been corrupted in this sense for a long time, and it just keeps getting worse, right? But it can't get worse forever. So it needs to be understood that like Christian XXers tend to be more anti-government because they already have a supreme alpha who they are devoted to. That is God. And God has put her husband over her in authority. And so she obeys her husband, and her husband and God are both opposed to government because of government's promotion of evil, government's anti-morality, anti-family stance that it usually takes, that it usually promotes. Virtue is power, and men need to realize this. Generosity is power, and frugality is power, because it allows a person to be generous, and generosity allows you to enslave people, like XXers, and thus men need to be more frugal, and then need to be more generous toward XXers. Because like if men start living in communes, you call it what you want, if men start buying a plot of land together, and then paying it off real quick, because there's like 50 or 100 men living on this one, 2 or 3 acre plot of land, or maybe even less. If men did that, were really frugal, and then paid off the land and the house or whatever it was, a little self-built house or self-built barracks or whatever, and then men were really frugal and saved a bunch of money, and then men built this community and saved a bunch of money, then they could start having a lot of extra money, and with that extra money, they could be generous toward XXers and get them out of the workforce. Especially if men all over the country were doing this by the tens of millions. Then all those men would have a lot of extra money, and with all that extra money, they could take care of XXers, right? With stipulations, of course, with conditions. In other words, if men are taking care of women, then men can demand female obedience in exchange for that provision. Virtue is a special power that men have, and men need to realize this and go back to being virtuous and use it as a weapon against XXers and against the government. That is, generosity can be a weapon that men use against XXers and against the government. And the more frugal men are, the more it harms the corporations. The corporations have less profit. The corporations have to lower the cost of their products. The corporations have to build products better. And this means that men don't have to buy things as often because of corporations no longer creating things that are planned to only endure a short time and then break, right? No more planned obsolescence because of men being way more frugal, right? And the corporations know that if they make a product that doesn't last, they're not going to be able to sell many because the word will get out and then nobody will buy their product, right? Men will just not spend money on that product at all rather than buy something that won't last a long time. And less easy profit for corporations means they'll have less money to do commercials promoting miscegenation and stuff. Thus allowing the population to stay higher in IQ, and thus allowing the people to retain a greater measure of control over the government than they would have if a large percentage of the population had 92 IQs because of miscegenating. Look at how liberal black people vote. That's because of their low IQs. But if we had, 30 or 50 million people in America of the next generation who were half black, and they had 92 IQs, they might not be as liberal as black people, but they'd be a hell of a lot more liberal than white people. I don't think you're going to find too many 92 IQ mulatto anarcho-capitalists. And if you did, that would be great, but I don't think you will. You see, so it'll increase tyranny, it'll make the country more liberal, etc. when miscegenation increases. Men also need to realize that intelligence, in other words rationality, which is a male quality, is not for the purpose of making money by screwing the country over like Lloyd Blankfein and Jamie Dimon do. It's instead for the purpose of joining men together on the basis of what is rational and reasonable and mutually beneficial. Men used to have an own group preference, but it was not based on blind preference for their own gender in opposition to the other gender, like XXers' own group preference is. Instead, men's own group preference was based on rationality. Men formed rules that worked for everyone in society. Rules like chastity, monogamy, sound money, inalienable rights, no drug use, no stealing, no lying, etc. And then all men enforced those rules on society and did so for the good of everyone, without which a functional society is not possible. That's what male intelligence, male rationality is for. It's for building and then maintaining a functional society through uniting men behind what makes sense. In other words, what is fair, functional, and sustainable. Morality really has a benefit where men join together with other men in a tight-knit community. Morality really is beneficial when men join together with other moral men in a tight-knit community. And that's the best way to do it. Right? If you just live among a bunch of immoral people and you're the only moral one, the only virtuous one, it's not only gonna feel like a waste to be moral, like you're putting in effort to be moral for no reason. It's also gonna feel like you're putting yourself at a disadvantage by being moral, because you are. You know, and therefore, by living with immoral people in a community that's not a community at all, you're just living in a city, not around people of your own kind, your own religion, your own race, your own, philosophical outlook, whatever. By living among people who are really nothing like you, even if they are your own race, you're incentivizing yourself to be less moral, less virtuous, because you're living among evil people. And this is a form of being unequally yoked. The Bible says to not be unequally yoked, and it was right. People should be around their own kind. Good people should be around good people, and bad people should be around bad people. Because bad people being forced to be around only bad people forces them to see the non-functionality of evil and then start being moral themselves. And good people only living around other good people makes it so that they're not corrupted, and they're giving an advantage to each other by being moral, and they're not being made to suffer and being at a disadvantage to evil people by being moral. There's no disadvantage to being good if everyone around you is good. It's actually an advantage for all of you. So if you're living among evil people, just in an average house or an average apartment in an average city, and you're not around people of your own kind, then you're assisting in the destruction of the country instead of helping build what is going to replace this empire when it falls. You're helping destroy the country. You're helping to make everything worse for everybody when you refuse to join together with other moral men and live in a community with those virtuous men. So men need to be moral, but they need to be cohesive and join tightly together with other virtuous people in a community like Pastor Dowell's. Men need to do all kinds of things. Men need to be creative. Men need to actually put solutions into practice. Men need to be virtuous, and they need to use that virtue to their advantage, because, like I said, this is one of men's powers, and men need to go back to taking advantage of the power of morality, both for their own sake and for women's sake, and for the sake of all the people that will be born in the future who deserve to be born into a free world, not a horrific neo-dystopia where everyone is a slave like today, but worse. It really blows my mind that I even have to say this stuff. The men of the past, it was so obvious to them. They knew this stuff. It was common sense that you have to be virtuous and that you have to be around only virtuous people, because otherwise you're going to get preyed on by evil people, and it's going to be a bad influence on your kids and all kinds of bad things. And you're not forcing the bad people to just, deal with each other and therefore try to realize and therefore possibly realize the importance of being good. And, because when you force evil people to hang out with each other, they're all going to become better. Because, they realize that, oh yeah, being evil sucks, because, if I'm an asshole to this guy, he's going to be an asshole right back, and then nothing is functional. We all better start being polite. You know what I mean? But if you let, everybody be good, but then you just have a few assholes here and there, and they never have to interact with each other, then it's like, then all the good people have to deal with the assholes, and then the assholes don't have to learn their lesson, because they're just dealing with good people, not bad people. You see, this is obvious, and like, united we stand, divided we fall. The people of the past understood that. That was like a common phrase in America. Everybody knew that phrase. That was like one of the phrases that was like an American phrase, united we stand, divided we fall. Everybody in America knew that and believed it because it was true and it was common sense to them. But now people are so deluded and so evil, they don't even realize that unity is power. I mean, why do you think rich, good-looking, really intelligent people join secret societies like Scroll and Key, Quill and Dagger, and Skull and Bones? Why do they do that? They're already good-looking. They're already rich. They're already intelligent. Why would they want to join a secret society like that? I'll tell you why. Because they are smart. They realize that unity is power. And being cohesive and having a group and having preference toward that group is power. They know that. And so they join these groups to increase their power. But we're so stupid, we don't even realize that, cohesiveness is power. It's ridiculous. I mean, we should be following the elites' example. They know that unity is power. They're already powerful, and yet they want to increase their power, so they form secret societies and join them. Right? We need to do the exact same thing. Another reason that women can't help each other is that they can't save money very well. They fight over each other. They're going to fight over men even more if they help each other in the workforce and edge out men, because then they'll be competing over a smaller number of marriageable men. XXers, even if they do make good money, even if they're rich, like they have hundreds of millions of dollars, that doesn't matter. They'll still often end up being broke. If they're rich or if they make good money, whatever. They could be making $30 million a year, and they could be basically broke. That's how much XXers spend money. Some men are the same way, but XXers are much worse than men in this respect. Despite the fact that some XXers are good savers. So until we start, good at saving money. So until we start genetically engineering XXers to be more frugal and moral in other ways, until we start genetically engineering NAWALTs, XXers are going to continue being bad at saving money, and thus they're not going to have extra money. Since they're not going to have much extra money, they're not going to be able to start new businesses, start a commune, etc. They're not going to be able to help XXers out, etc., etc. So because men are able to save money, men are thus able to do things that XXers are not able to do. If men want to help themselves, they need to help each other. It really is not a zero-sum game. If you help other men, this helps your community, and that helps you. And it can also help you in general. Like, what if smarter guys, upper middle class guys, with let's say $1 million in the bank, what if these smart guys were benevolent and were encouraging and helping poorer guys to start communes with lots of guys, so as to be able to get them out from under the slavery of paying rent? What if these guys were organizing it and were loaning the poor guys the money and were only charging 15% interest per year, so that if the poor guys got enough people living in the commune, they could pay the land and the housing off in 1 year, because there's like 100 guys living on 1 acre or 2 acres, right? And they built this big barracks to house them all, right? The guy who loaned them the money would be paid back in 1 year and would get 15% on his money. Then he could do it again with a new group of guys. And the first group of guys that already have now the land and the housing paid for, and the rich guy, who loaned them the money for this, not rich, but he's got $1 million in the bank or whatever. He's like, upper middle class. This guy, he loans them the money, and then they buy the land, and then they build the housing structure. Maybe he knows a friend who can help them do it and use them as the sweat equity, the labor, even though they're unskilled. He knows maybe the guy with $1 million who loans them the money knows a carpenter friend who could get paid to help direct them in doing the work. The people who are going to live there, and then now they've got the land down, the housing structure paid off, and now they can just save up money all on their own without borrowing any more. And then they buy more land, and then they save up more money, and then they bring in more people, and then they save up more money, and then they buy more land and build more housing structures. All they need is that first step, someone loaning them the money in the first place, so that they could pay it off like that in a year with a bunch of guys, and have him maybe help them build the housing structure. Right? That's all they need. And then they're self-sustainable after that. They just save up more money, buy more land, save up more money, buy more land, save up more money, buy more land, bring more men in, save even more money faster, buy more land, etc. And this guy could just keep doing this, loaning his $1 million out to, or $500,000 out or whatever, to some guys, to let's say $1 million, loaning this out to some guys to do this with, 100 guys. I want to do that, and then they pay him back with interest, and then he does it with another group of guys. So he's just setting up more and more and more guys to do this, who are self-sustainable after that. You see, the first group of guys would have somewhere to live rent-free after that, like I said, because of having paid off the land and the cost of the building materials, and having paid off the cost of the building materials for the barracks that they live in on their land. And then they would thus be able to save money instead of paying rent, thus enabling them to buy more land in another year or two, and then buy even more land the year after that. And then they'll be able to build much nicer living quarters on the land once they saved up the money to do that. So just that first year or two is all that's needed. After that, the guys are on their financial feet. They're above the enslavement of rent, and they're thus able to build their wealth at whatever speed they want and in whatever way they want. Then the initial guy who loaned them the money could loan that same money that he got back with interest out to another group of guys. And because he's making 10% more than inflation, he's still making a profit. Even when you take inflation into account, he's making 10% on his money each year. And that's a lot. It's a lot when you consider the fact that pensions are built on the assumption that they'll be able to get 8% interest on their money so that they can make payments and not go broke. That's what the pensions assume. And yet they're not even able to get anywhere near 8% these days, which is why pensions are going broke. Right, like CalPERS, I think it's called. It's the biggest pension fund in California. Right, they assume 8%, that they can get 8% on their money year after year after year, and yet they're not even getting anywhere near 8%. So it's going broke. CalPERS is. So making 10%, 10 or 15%, like let's say he's making 15% on his money. This guy with a few million bucks in the bank who's repeatedly loaning out $1 million to a new group of guys every year, and then they're paying him back within that year because there's 100 guys living on the land, and they're all living there rent free. They're just paying back the guys so that then they'll own the land, right? And they pay him back 15%, but you take out the 5% for interest, right? Because dollars get worth less and less every year. Well, he's still making, even if you take out the 5%, he's still making 10% on his money every year, the guy who loaned them the money in the first place. And that 10% is above inflation. That's a lot. Even gold only makes, I think, 2.5% above inflation. And that's only if you hold the gold for decades, because, some years, some decades it doesn't go up at all. Some decades it goes up a lot, with gold. So you got to hold it for a long time. But this guy would be making 10% above inflation every year, So the guy who loaned out the money would be making a lot of profit, but it would still be far cheaper for the guys than if they had borrowed money from a bank, right? So the guy who loaned the money would be getting richer. The poor guys would be getting out of the slavery system we live in. And the arrangement would also be helping more and more guys, as the upper middle class guys loaning the money did this over and as the upper middle class guy loaning the money did this over and over with a new group of guys each time, thus helping more and more young guys get out of the slavery system. And as far as borrowing money from a bank, it's like the bank will make you pay off the interest first, right? So even if you had 100 guys on, a tiny plot of land, and you could get the money from the bank to do that, like I'm not saying the bank would necessarily give you the money to do that, but even if they did, you would have to pay back the interest first. So you'd still be paying back a huge amount of interest, right? It's not the case that you could pay it back quicker and then not have to pay the interest. So you would actually still be paying just as much if you paid the money back quickly from the bank as if you paid it back over 30 years or whatever. You see, so this is why it's much, much better to get a loan from an upper middle class guy and do it that way than borrow money from a bank. You see, so this is really important to understand, right? And like I said, he'd be helping more and more young guys get out of the slavery system. And number one, he could do this only with guys, no XXers, thus helping men and not helping XXers, thus perhaps helping to make XXers cave, especially if guys are doing this all over the country. We're helping only men like this. And no women could do this unless they found a woman to loan her the money. But no rich women were helping, poor women do this, right? Because women are selfish and they're not good at saving, so they wouldn't have the money to do it in the first place. So this would make it so that, this would be massively helping men get a massive financial advantage over women, right? And then the men could all get rich enough to buy apartment complexes, and now they're making money from women. Now women are renting apartments, and all men are owning apartments, and now all of women's wealth is being siphoned to men, you see? And then the slavery system is helping men instead of harming men. Now the slavery system is only harming women. Once all men own apartment complexes and no men are renting apartments, and only women are renting apartments because of all men having done this, saved for several years with 100 men and a small plot of land to pay back a guy who loaned them the money. They pay him back in a year, and then they keep on saving, keep on living there and buying more land and bringing more people on and buying more land and all that. Right? Like if all men in the country, young men in the country are doing this, it would make it so that eventually all young men in the country are rich, relatively, and all women are poor, relatively. And then the slavery system would be working on men's behalf instead of against men, like it is today, right? And this would help make XXers cave, and it would help destroy feminism, right? And it would actually help top men too, because like I said, they'd be making a lot of interest, and the country would be becoming more patriarchal, which would benefit the top men as well. Men would start to get control over the government, perhaps, and then we could lower the taxes for everyone, including top men. So then those upper middle class, well, not top men, but upper middle class men, and then those upper middle class men would be getting richer that way too, because of lower taxes, because of all men being in charge in society, right? And plus, this would make you could get like men of other races who typically vote liberal, like black men. You could get them to be conservative by having conservative men loan out money to poor black men to do this with, and maybe along with white men or whatever. But whatever you do this, then you help black men out like this, and then black men are gonna feel indebted to white men, and then are gonna listen to white men when these top white men, these upper middle class white men, tell them that conservatism is the way to go. Liberalism is stupid. Like, look at how much we've helped you, and look at how little the government has helped black people over the decades. Already, in like just 10 or 15 years, we've helped black people more than the government ever has over the last 50 or 70 years or whatever, right? And then black people will be like, holy shit, that's true. We're going to become conservative, right? So you could actually make liberal men of like Latinos or blacks or whatever. You could actually make them way more conservative by being generous to them in this way, because then they're going to listen to you when you teach them about conservatism and sound money and freedom. You see, and women are going to have to waste an insane amount of money every year on rent if all men are not renting and all women are renting, and thus they won't be able to save much money. And then if they have leftover money to save, they'll usually waste it on buying stuff anyway. And unlike the solution of advancing men over XXers by men only hiring women, which is illegal, this is a solution. Men donating money, loaning money to other men to start their own communities. This solution is 100% legal because there's no corporation and thus nothing to be subject to Title IX. It's just one individual man or many individual men acting individually as individuals in donating money to groups of young guys who are then going to use it to buy land and build a barracks, and who are then going to pay those individual men back with interest for having given them that loan. The government can force a business to hire XXers if it only hires men, or can fine a business or send somebody to prison or something if they hire only men, but the government cannot force individual men to make loans to XXers. So this is a legal way of advancing men and leaving XXers behind. It's a way of increasing male power in society and decreasing female power in society. And another good thing about men loaning poor men money to buy land and build barracks for men to live in so that those men can pay them back by avoiding paying rent is that it cuts the bankers out of the equation. And it therefore puts pressure on our debt-based fiat currency system, which requires infinite growth. And the creators of money are the banks. They are the main creators of money. They create way more money than the Federal Reserve does. So you can actually, by cutting the bankers out, you can actually taper the Ponzi scheme and thereby destroy it. Because Ponzi schemes like the dollar, debt-based dollar, cannot be tapered. And our fiat currency system is a Ponzi scheme because it is debt-based fiat currency, not an ordinary fiat currency system. And of course, the Jewish people have inordinate power in banking, and thus by harming the bankers, you're not only harming the government and fiat currency in general, you're harming the wandering tribe as well. And that's a good thing. And the more poor America becomes because of government spending perpetually increasing, and debt needing to perpetually increase at faster and faster rates, and because of automation taking jobs and everything else, the more this will mean that there will be more and more men who will want to use this kind of solution to survive, thus making it so that the guy loaning out the money will always be able to find more men to take him up on his offer to loan them money so that they can, buy their own land and live together, and then buy more land because of not having to pay rent anymore, and then eventually they'll all get to own their own plot of land and own their own little housing structure, So this means that, more and more men are going to be helped because more and more men are going to be doing this because of more and more men being poorer because of automation and stuff, right? And then the guy loaning out the money, because he has more and more people to loan people to, and he's getting interest on his money, therefore he has more money to loan out. So, maybe for the first several years, he's only loaning out to one group at a time. But then, he makes 10% every year above inflation. After, 10 years or so, that's more than double the money he had before, above inflation. And so then he's actually able to loan out, he's able to loan out money twice at the same time, So then he's able to always be starting two of these communities at once. And then he's making even more money, right? So he'll be able to therefore get richer and richer at a faster and faster rate, especially since more and more men will be doing this out of survival instinct alone because of increasing poverty. And he's going to be helping men at a faster rate as well, because instead of saving 50 to 100 men from the slavery of rent every year, he'll be helping to save 100 to 200 men each year from the slavery of rent. Guys who then stay rent free for the rest of their lives. And of course, the more men who do this, the more XXers will want to copy it, and they'll either want to form their own all-female communities, which might be good in terms of making XXers less dependent on the government, which will thus make it more possible to regain power from the government because of XXers being less turned against us, because of XXers being less dependent on government, or instead, XXers might want to join those all-male communities instead of making their own all-female communities, and that would be a good thing as well, because it would mean that if men chose to let XXers into their communities, they could set the conditions that XXers would have to meet in order to be allowed to join those communities, and thus the men could make very strict conditions that the XXers would have to follow to be allowed in, right? Thus allowing men to get XXers control thus allowing men to get XXers back under control if large numbers of men were forming their own communities like this. And like I said, this is something the men can do and XXers cannot do easily because of men being more able to be Spartan and men being better at saving money. So men need to realize that morality and virtue and generosity and cohesiveness with other men is to their benefit. It's going to make them richer, freer, more powerful, happier, wiser, because of having more free time to study things, etc. And now, finally, for some propaganda and symbolism in the movie The Last Jedi. It may have been intentional propaganda when, right after Kylo Ren chokes the military commander under him, and the guy's like, "Long live the Supreme Leader." Right after Snoke had died, he says, "The Supreme Leader is dead." And then Kylo Ren starts choking him, and then he's like, "Long live the Supreme Leader." Right after that, they show Leia in a cloak or something, and she's in that base that, they're going to assault with that miniaturized blast from like Death Star tech, remember they said? And there's that huge door in front of that little base or whatever, right? She's got her like cloak up in front of her face all the way up to her eyes, so only her eyes and the top of her head are visible. And then she's shown from the back from much farther away. And the base door is half closed and the sun is barely visible. It's visible, but it's like maybe half covered by the half or almost covered by the door. And then there's a green half circle going around the sun, like a crescent. Right? The sun is a form of star. Stars are suns. So the sun here may very well be intended to be a star, and the half circle may very well be intended to be a crescent, which is what it looked like, except for it was just thinner than your typical moon crescent. And the star in a crescent is a symbol that you see in Islam. And it's also an Illuminati symbol that's frequently seen on TV shows. I don't know what it means, but I've seen it before, many places, and I pointed it out before in earlier videos. I pointed out in that one video that I saw the symbolism in at least one episode of the TV show Heathers. They had that on one of the t-shirts of one of the people. And I've seen it in some other shows, movies, or music videos also, but I can't remember where. The star and crescent is definitely an Illuminati symbol. And I think that part of The Last Jedi was intentionally showing that symbol for those who are astute enough to notice it. And then there was the miscegenation propaganda in it when the fat Asian girl kisses the black guy after she stops him from ramming his little skimmer into the blaster that's going to blast the door open to the base. And then there's also the one-eye symbolism in The Last Jedi as well. It's when Phasma, that shiny metal-armored stormtrooper, all the stormtroopers wear white, but she's the special one. She's wearing that shiny metal. She's just about to fall into the flames below. I think it's her, whatever. Whether it's a guy or a girl, Phasma is about to fall into the flames below just before the ground collapses under Phasma. And Phasma looks at the black guy who's defeated Phasma, and then I think it was her, and she calls him scum. And then he corrects her and he says, "Rebel scum." And right then you see that her mask is broken at her left eye, so that only her one eye is visible. And the camera really focuses in on that part of her face, the broken part of the mask that shows her eye, and a little bit of skin around the eye. And there's also one eye, and that was definite Illuminati symbolism if you ask me. And then there's also one-eye symbolism in the movie Baby Driver when Ansel Elgort's character is running away from the cops and his sunglasses are broken and one is missing a lens and the other is not missing a lens, making only one of his eyes visible almost the whole running turn. I mean, he just runs and runs and runs. Like, that scene is really long, and almost the whole scene, he's got the glasses on, and one eye is visible and one eye is not. This is, to me, very obvious one-eye symbolism. If you start looking for it, you're going to start seeing this stuff everywhere. They do this stuff on purpose. And if you think I'm just reading too much into this stuff, then you have not looked into this issue of Illuminati symbolism enough. Once you look into it, you will be surprised to see that this stuff is absolutely real and that this is not an accident. I'm not just reading stuff into this. This has been Redshift. I hope someone got something out of this video. Peace trucks for greedy, miserly men who don't care about other men.